Hello everyone, my name is Emily Dunbar and welcome to NYO Canada Online Workshops. Our YouTube live chat is now open and we will be fielding questions throughout the presentation, so please feel free to write any questions, comments, or chat amongst yourselves throughout. It is my very great pleasure to introduce today's presenter. He is a renowned artist manager for the likes of Jonathan Crow, Cameron Crosman, and the Griffin Trio, to name a few. He is also a graduate lecturer from the University of Toronto and the Glenn Gould School. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Kwan.
NYO Canada, thank you for the sponsors for supporting this wonderful cause and wonderful program. I wish the times were different and that we would all be in rehearsals and sectionals. Nonetheless, hopefully what I can share and my guests can share will add to the fulfillment of this program for each of you. Today, I'm very honored to have Andrea Davison from Calgary as my co-panelist as my guest. Andrea and I have worked for, I would say, at least 15, if not 20 years together. When you started when you were 7 or so, and Andrea is a wonderful, knowledgeable, experienced person in the overall realm of arts administration, and more recently, in the past 4 years, I would say. Much more focused in the orchestral world. Andrea has been involved with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra for over a year and a half, and then from Calgary, she was, well, you know what, I will introduce Andrea. I do know all the various positions you have worked in with the Calgary Philharmonic, and then most recent as interim executive director with Regina Symphony, and I knew you before you came into the orchestral world. So welcome, Andrea. Thank you for joining us. And can you share a little bit about your background, where you're from, your education, instruments, and then the arts administrative roles that you've done recently?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. And thanks so much for the invitation to join you today and to connect with the National Youth Orchestra of Canada musicians. And here we are in this socially distant world. And I guess to start, I'll just tell everyone a little bit about my background. I grew up in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. I was part of a musical family. My mom was my first piano teacher, and we made that last as long as we could. And then I continued studying piano in university. I did my undergraduate degree at Acadia University, and then transitioned to Calgary for my Master of Music degree. And I've mostly been based in Calgary since then, aside from the few contract positions that you had just mentioned, Andrew.
Great. So what got you into arts administration?
Well, that was a bit serendipitous. I'm not sure it was where I thought my trajectory in the arts would lead me, but I'm very grateful for where I am and all the experiences I've had. But I mean, honestly, when I was working on my Master of Music degree at the University of Calgary, there was this fairly new at the time international piano competition here in Calgary called the Honens International Piano Competition. And I knew it was just a fantastic learning opportunity. So I volunteered at the time and organized the music library for the competition in 2000. And one thing led to another. And after I'd finished my degree, I was working, teaching and accompanying, but there was also a contract position that came up at Honens as the administrative and communications assistant. And that was a a term contract for about 18 months through the next competition cycle, which was in 2003. And I did that, learned lots of things. And then a few years later, a full-time position came up with the organization, and I applied and worked with Honens for the majority of my career as an artistic administrator.
Wow. And then like many of us in the industry, you expand, you seek new challenges, and you went into the orchestral world. I believe you came to Toronto for contract.
Yes, that's exactly right. After my career with Honens, I had the chance to cover a maternity contract with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, and I was the manager of special projects and festivals with the TSO, which was a really wonderful introduction to how orchestras work. It had a wide variety of responsibilities and touch points with different parts of the organization. So it was a really great introduction to the orchestral side of things.
Oh, wow. And after that contract was up, you went back to Calgary, and then there was another wonderful position that sort of just fell on your lap.
Well, once again, a colleague at the Calgary Philharmonic was on a leave of absence, and again, I had the chance to fill in on an interim basis as the manager of artistic operations there.
Wow.
And that was for the best part of a year, and then after a small break when I went biking in Scotland with my dad, I came back and had the wonderful opportunity to work with the Regina Symphony as their interim executive director while they completed a search for the full-time permanent position.
Wow. It's one, as you walked through these various positions, one of the things that I recalled from our second guest, which was Alison Bent, a colleague of yours from Toronto Symphony Days. Alison sort of talked about the life of a freelance musician, freelance orchestral musician in and around Toronto, and so that 2-3 hour driving radius of Toronto. And one of the things that Alison was very clear to make, a point that you made, was the notion of networking. And I recalled when you were coming to Toronto as a friend and a colleague, we spoke about what life was like in Toronto, and you referred to someone who is the artistic, what is Loie's title?
Vice President of Artistic Planning.
Right, Vice President. And you were talking to her about this position that was available. How did you know Loie Fallis?
Well, I had the chance to connect with Loie previously through my work with the Honens International Piano Competition, because part of my role there was to work as a manager for the prize winners of the competition. So of course that included working to find orchestral engagements for the laureates of the competition, and we were very fortunate to have the chance for our laureates to perform with the Toronto Symphony. It was obviously an incredible stepping stone for their careers.
And through that, you met obviously the administrative staff at Toronto Symphony, and your the fact that the Honens International Piano Competition engages the Calgary Phil for the final round stage. As artist manager for the competition, you were always in correspondence and in working directly with Calgary Phil's staff as well.
That's exactly right. We worked very closely with the Calgary Phil for the finals of each competition. And there were many occasions when we were awaiting the decision from the jury to find out who the finalists would be. And of course, their music librarian is just chomping at the bit to get the final announcement of which concerti will be performed, and get the parts distributed and shared with the players. So that was always a great chance to also see how an orchestra works behind the scenes, but as a colleague and collaborator on the competition.
Which obviously, through those type of experiences and work ethic that you put into your role as special projects manager and then artistic operations at Calgaryville, through that type of reputation that you built, they brought you into Regina Symphony during a transitional time of that orchestra. One of the things that hopefully that those listening today will very quickly see and hear, whether it's through Allison or through Andrea, and those two are people who are more administrative as compared to my first guest, Cameron Crosman, but Cameron as well is a bit of a guru in what I'm going to share here. The importance of networking, the importance of maintaining relationships. Allison mentioned that there is an association of orchestral personnel managers in North America, and they're on the phone with each other. They've got e-threads with each other. There's listservs with each other. And that holds true for people in administrative positions in the Canadian orchestras. Who would have thought someone in Regina would have heard of the work he did in both Toronto and Calgary?
If I can share a little bit around that as well, Andrew. I mean, one of the really terrific things that I had an opportunity to work with at the TSO was the Canada Mosaic project. It was just wrapping up from the sesquicentennial year. And I think, as many people know, the Toronto Symphony Orchestra had some funding from the Canadian government, which they used to partner with orchestras across Canada for commissioning 40 different pieces, these short fanfare or overture type pieces, which we affectionately called sesquies, as well as some more extended works and larger commissions with partner orchestras across the country. And between sort of wrapping up the sesquicentennial season and the ongoing interest in some of those newly commissioned works, it gave me a great chance to be in touch with orchestras across the country to share knowledge and build those connections as well.
It's so crucial of a message that's the senior administrators, like those of us who have been in this industry, and many of the participants of the NYO and their teachers, we cannot stress the importance of that network building, that relationship building. And whether it is as a freelance musician, that type of networking holds true in every stage of your life. And who would have thought 20 years ago when you and I worked together because of, I don't even remember what aspect of the competition we worked together, that here we are talking to the next generation of musicians. Thank you. So you worked Toronto, Calgary, Regina, three, probably all professional orchestras, all different size budgets and activities. Mm-hmm. How did you find the orchestras? How did you find sort of the environment? You shared with us the roles and duties. Again, three very different type of activities within each organization. You are not the personnel manager for all three orchestras. You had different responsibilities. Can you share some, can you sort of chart the three orchestras and tell us, let's start with the biggest to the smallest. What was the administrative structure? What was it like working with an orchestra whose budget is, I want to say 22 million?
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
And if we need to do any fact checking, they do have some great resources on the Orchestras Canada page to double check our stats and figures. But working with all of those orchestras, I have to say, was invigorating and exciting. It's, a big reason why I do what I do is to be a part of making fabulous music happen on stage, and just feeling that connection between the musicians and the audience is one of my big motivators. In terms of the structure at the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, I was part of the fabulous artistic and operations team there. And like I said, it was such a great learning opportunity for me to get an understanding about the timelines and I guess opportunities to work together and the kind of coordination that needs to happen between, say, the personnel manager to make sure we have the right number of extras hired for a certain show, to make sure that's communicated to the operations team, so they have the very basic right number of stands and chairs on stage. That clear communication is just essential for everyone to keep things running smoothly, and that applies to an orchestra of any size, really. So that was a great thing to learn there. And part of my role with the TSO was, aside from working with the Canada Mosaic Project, I was also working on what they called special projects and festivals. So that included everything from, think projects like film and concert, which has become a big part of orchestral programming these days, to working on the POPs programming along with their principal POPs conductor, Stephen Reinecke. And that work set me up for part of my responsibilities with the Calgary Philharmonic, where, again, I was working on some of their POPs programming and specials, as they call them there, which, again, included film and concert and that sort of thing.
You use the term "it sets you up for these special projects." What are the responsibilities of the administrator, and how does someone develop that program? How does the conductor develop that program?
Well, certainly. I have to say, I think it was a privilege with all of these organizations that the ideas and contributions were shared quite freely. Working with, like I said, the principal POPs conductor at the TSO, working with Runa Bergman at the Calgary Philharmonic, and the music director Gordon Gerard in Regina. Of course, their input is key to all of the artistic planning. And when it comes to deciding program and themes for a season, they are providing that direction to the artistic administrative team, and giving direction on everything from a program to potential guest artists. And then the artistic team takes that direction and goes out to negotiate, essentially, whether it's booking a soloist for a concerto or securing film licensing for a film and concert. That's where the artistic planning team takes over.
both you and Allison use this term team or committees. What is sort of expected of musicians in the orchestra as far as administrative, and I'm not going to say duties because that's why there's administrators, but what's their input? What is their involvement? How much, and obviously with 3 different size orchestras and 3 different level of performances, as far as number of performances in a season, it varies. And, there's, I think of an organization like Regina Symphony, and how many people were in the office compared to how many people were in the office of the Toronto Symphony. Huge difference, I'm sure.
Yes, certainly. Well, just to come back to your question around the musicians' involvement. I mean, at all 3 orchestras, they had committees, usually called a players committee or a musicians committee, that would meet regularly with the administration, so that there was a regular opportunity for clear and consistent communication, sharing of planning ideas, bringing up any concerns from either side, or any issues that might need to be addressed. It was also an opportunity for musicians to bring forward potential ideas for consideration for programming or guest artists. As you were saying, it is very much a networking based industry. So if a musician is hearing another player, perhaps when they're touring and hearing another orchestra play, then of course they bring those ideas back to the table for input. And I think I lost you for a moment, Andrew.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So that would be one type of committee. I can only imagine right now the work that's in front of, for example, a committee like occupational health and safety, in terms of how orchestras are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Because there are obviously so many considerations at play for bringing together a large group of musicians and making sure that their health and well-being is top of mind. So that would be another example of a committee to work with. On the musician side, often musicians might be asked to work together with a fundraising and development team in terms of building relationships with donors and other stakeholders in an orchestra.
It's interesting. In one of my classroom lectures a few years ago, I happened to know that Jeff Alexander, I'm not sure how many of you would know that name, maybe some people from Vancouver. Jeff was the former executive director of the Vancouver Symphony, and around, I think, 2-3 years ago, he was appointed another orchestra, this little band called Chicago Symphony. And Jeff, in his talk for my class at the Glen Gould School, said that strangely, in his tenure at Vancouver, it still felt a little like players versus administration. And I think this is something that's embedded, something that's grandfathered, something that will always be the case. But at the same time, I'm also seeing a lot of changes and these type of, and I don't want to say friction because that's too hard a term, but definitely the channels of communication is opening more and more so. How did you find that level of involvement from the players? As far as do you feel that in the 3 different level orchestras, not artistic level, but size level, budget level, what was sort of your differences that you felt comparatively Toronto to Calgary to Regina?
Well, honestly, Andrew, I mean, I think I need to speak more to what was consistent than rather what was different between those three orchestras, because across the board, the musician involvement in these kinds of committees was committed. It was something they took very, very seriously, because it's building the future for the organization. And obviously, as a musician, you're very invested in the success of the orchestra going forward. And I mean, and it only makes sense. For example, I mean, another committee that a musician might be invited to join would be an audition committee, or for a music director search. I was quite involved in the search for the new affiliate composer at the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. And again, we had musician representatives on that committee, because it's a commitment for the orchestra going forward that they will be working with this composer for the next 2 seasons. And of course, we want to be building buy-in around the table.
Fantastic. It's definitely, the days of the expectation of administration versus the players, and where the lines of responsibility, the lines of communication has blurred quite drastically. It's the days of the ivory tower, senior brass, so to speak, that never comes down the hallway. I feel that that has drastically changed in our business, and it's good to hear from someone who has worked in recent years in 3 different size orchestras that is the case. Can you, if the young artists who are in the room that we're speaking to this afternoon, what advice can you give them, having been in different orchestras? And many of these orchestras will be the ones that will have positions opening and audition spots opening. What can you share about the expectation of orchestral life?
Well, I mean, it's not a surprise to anyone, but you can sort of kiss your evenings and weekends goodbye for the most part. But I know all of us who work in the arts are well aware of that, and that's perhaps not a real sacrifice for anyone. But if you're asking for advice to bring to an audition, am I understanding your question, Andrew?
Let's skip the audition. Let's talk about sort of what is life like once you're in an orchestra. Because I feel that the audition process, the students have often commented in my course evaluations that they wish I would speak more about the audition process. And to me, the audition process, you can learn more from your studio teacher that you're studying with at your university or through the NYO program. 2, check the listings. 3, get the excerpt list. 4, show up on time. And that's pretty much it. That's the audition process. And if you get hired, congratulations. Let's see.
Well, it is a highly competitive for all of the orchestral positions, is my understanding from just general conversations with musicians who may be in the hunt for a position like that.
I'm sure Orchestras Canada would have statistics, and I encourage young emerging musicians who are looking for a career in orchestras to join these organizations, to sign up. They often have free newsletters that they will send out. There is Orchestras Canada here in Canada, and the League of American Orchestras. Is that the name?
I always get that one backwards too. I think there's American Symphony Orchestra League of American Symphony Orchestras.
I'll look that up and get that up for everyone. Join these type of organizations. There's always a student level if membership fee is required. Otherwise, sign up for their newsletters and learn about the industry of the orchestras, the symphonies. Across North America, across Europe, there are many orchestras which are doing very innovative things, and that sort of puts me to a segue of asking you a relatively philosophical and heavy question. Um, Here we are, 2020. Last year, I had the privilege of eating dinner and lunch with students in the hall in the residence at Wilfrid Laurier, because we were able to be one-on-one in a room. And now here we are, 2020, and we're delivering information through digital platform. Post-COVID, we know that this is a blip in history. 1917 was the Spanish flu. It lasted for a year and a half, 2 years. Society still moved on. There was music called Beethoven before 1917, and there's music much after the Spanish flu. How do you see the role of orchestra in community? How will that change? How will responsibilities change as far as young orchestral players being, like I said, assume they win the audition and they're part of this organism that is live, and here we are talking about social distancing. I'm not asking you about how do you envision the orchestral stage with social distancing, but
Right.
the role, the heartbeat of the organization of the orchestra within the community.
Well, that's a great question, Andrew, and I mean, I'm sure all of us would give a fortune to have a crystal ball to know exactly, I guess, the how we're all going to move forward through this. But I mean, I think overall, I mean, for orchestras have been really examining and engaging with the question of what does it mean to be an orchestra in this community, wherever you are. And I think that's going to become even more integral to the work of an orchestra going forward. I think there's an opportunity for orchestras to consult with the community and learn more about what they can do. I think there's an opportunity to demonstrate the power of music making to help our society with issues like mental health and social isolation, which so many of us have been experiencing lately. And I mean, and orchestras have risen to the occasion with various online offerings, and I mean, and I think just tying that link forward into the future for when we are back together in person, whatever that looks like, but to build on those kinds of initiatives that will, I think, keep strengthening our communities and the connection of the orchestra to the community where they work.
Fantastic. I definitely, and correct me if I'm wrong, I definitely feel also that, as I mentioned, those channels of communication between administration and player are much more fluid this day and age versus what that type of life was 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But definitely the role of the player to be ambassadors for the orchestra will be much more relevant as we move forward. It will not just simply be, oh, it's the administrative's role to deal with that. It's our role to deal with that. And there's a conductor who also has a smaller program, Boris Brott, and I'm sure many listening know of his Academy Orchestra program. And Boris often uses the orchestra as a corporate rah-rah motivational speaking exercise in showing how this 60, 70, 80 piece individual organism come together as one to make things. And I think as we move forward, as the role of the orchestra and community moves forward after this post-COVID, it's not just going to be 80 musicians, but 140 of administrators and players together being the living organism of the orchestral institution, so to speak. Anything else you'd like to share with these aspiring young musicians today?
Well, I just simply like to say I can't wait to hear you play again. And I would encourage everyone to be patient, because as you said, Andrew, I mean, this too shall pass, and we'll learn and be stronger from this experience. And I just can't wait until the music brings us all together again.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for your experience sharing, your knowledge sharing, your enthusiasm, and I'm sure hopefully a lot of little bits have sunk in with those listening. I will just quickly ask if anyone has a question for Andrea. It's a very strange platform, so.
Yeah, we're just going to have a quick pause and wait for a few moments to see if anybody has a question to pop up. And I'll take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of everyone watching, Andrea, and on behalf of NYO. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real treat for me in particular.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Okay.
Great. All right. I'll pull you out of this stream, and if anybody has any questions for Andrea, feel free to pop them up and we'll bring Andrea back to answer.
Okay, thank you. So the original design of these was to have a little guest talk about various aspects of the industry, and after that, I always feel that hopefully there's a tidbit of brick and mortar or meat and potatoes that I can share. It's always nice to have talking heads share experiences of the administrative life, but at the same time, I feel is to make sure that you guys walk away hopefully having some things answered. Today, we're just going to talk quickly about Heather Leo. Thank you. We'll save that for Andrea. Today we're going to talk about promotional materials, and I realize that this seems counterproductive, counterintuitive to some of the information shared by Allison as far as the role of the audition process and what is required. Yes, you do not need a glossy 8x10 photo of yourself if you're applying to the symphony. I agree. But as many of your teachers, of key orchestral players, many of you probably have heard of this string quartet called the New Orford String Quartet, whose membership consists of Jonathan Crow, Andrew Wan, Brian, and I forget the last, if anyone wants to pop up, the violist, who's I believe in Detroit right now. They form a string quartet, and their chamber activity is in addition to their hugely successful orchestral career. Most of you will obviously know Jonathan as Toronto Symphony, Andrew as Montreal Symphony, Brian, and I don't represent them, so I apologize. Anyhow, they all have principal roles, and yet they continue to pursue a chamber quartet career. So today's topic, promotional materials, doesn't really pertain to you applying for a job with an orchestra, but as I say, after 3 or 4 or 5 years of being in an orchestra, you may seek other other ventures, you may seek other interests, and also the tough reality, as Andrea mentioned, as Allison mentioned, the audition process is extremely competitive. Um, and I was about to say Orchestras Canada, League of American Orchestra, they would have better statistics as to how many apply for an opening in the violin section and the clarinet section and whatever section. And if one in 40, if there's one position for 40 applicants, that's that the probability is still rather low to get a job. So until you do end up getting that orchestral job, you may very well seek other artistic ventures on your own. And this is where, obviously, someone like myself, I work with soloists who are on the touring networks, who are on the performance on the concerto networks. And that is where I need to develop publicity, promotional materials in order for my clients to get noticed, to be considered, and to be hired. So a lot of young musicians, one of the things they often ask me is what is in a press kit. And I thought we'd just sort of start off with some of the basic questions again. What is a press kit? And again, yes, these will be, and I apologize, I think it was Leo who asked me if the slides were available. The biography slides are actually available now. I sent them to Chris, who will send them out or have them available somewhere on the NYOC websites. A press kit. A press kit is a package, whether it's printed or digital, of your artistic capability. And your artistic capability is not just, oh, I play the violin or I play the oboe. Your artistic capability is more than just that. What is the program? What is it that you're trying to sell? So to continue, why is a press kit required? It's a representation of what you've got to offer. Reality is that all of you are based in some part of Canada, and yes, your first area of exposure, of opportunity, will be your home base. But like anything, you cannot perform in your home base 4 times a year, so to speak. You will have to expand the territory. And so that being the case, how do you, if you're based in Calgary, if you're based in Regina, if you're based in Winnipeg, how do you try to get an opportunity with Ottawa, with Vancouver, with Edmonton? If you have the financial means to fly to Edmonton or travel to Edmonton and meet the people there, that's the best way to do it. But I know for a fact that process gets extremely expensive. So as a result, you email them, you pick up the phone and you call them, you figure out who they are, and you send them your publicity, your promotion, your press kits. I apologize for the typo. In this industry here in 2020, it is still a requirement. People need to learn about you. The delivery of this information has changed. 25 years ago, we would photocopy all these materials, stick them into a folder, go to the post office, mail it with a cassette tape. Fast forward to 2020, this essentially is the foundation, is the base of the information needed on a website, so to speak. So the industry still uses this press kits. The delivery of it has changed, but the content has not changed, and the information of it is still relevant. So that's sort of why you will need a press kit. And a cost-effective way to introduce yourself. Of course, the cheapest way is a upfront expense of developing a website, but then to direct someone to your website doesn't cost any money anymore. The old-fashioned way of paper and audio sampler cost money in both postage, in both printing, in both copying of audio materials, etc. So nonetheless, all of that material can be housed through a website, or it can be housed on a USB stick, and I'll get to that. A press kit has marginally modified, or one can sort of explain that it tells your story. Again, to say that I'm a violinist, hire me. Well, you can be a new music violinist, you can be a Baroque violinist, you can be an experimental improvisational violinist. What are you offering? What is someone wanting to, what do you want someone to hire you as? So your press kit is a collection of that type of information so that whoever's reading gets the idea, okay, this is a classical type programming of a violin and piano, or this is going to be an interesting program because it's violin and guitar. Whatever that is, it's your story, it's your program that is of interest that we need to share. Sorry about that, my phone just rang. So keep that in mind as you develop the content for your press kit. So let's go in and talk about what is in a press kit. I'm just going to put this all up there, and we will go through each of them very quickly. Of course, the hard copy press kits, those which are in a presentation folder, and I've got a quick little picture of that. You would ideally have a business card. This day and age, because we're sending things by email, I always suggest to young artists, after we get off this conversation today, each of you should go into your email setting and figure out how to tag a signature, your name, your instrument, a telephone number, if you're comfortable with that type of information. If you have a website, put it in there, so that from this day forward, every email you send out, your contact information. Again, I cannot stress how important that is. I realize that communication has become very casual in texting each other, in sending WhatsApp with each other, in messaging each other. But this is your career, and your career is a professional exchange of transactions. So have that signature properly done in your email body, where anytime you compose an email, your information, you, oboist, you, if you're an oboist, if you are a PhD, a DMA candidate, if you've done your Masters of Music, have that ready and always available. The biography we talked about last week, and Leo mentioned that it's posted. Those who weren't in the room last week, I sort of did a sort of industry standard template of writing a biography, and that information is not carved in stone. I jokingly say to my students, Moses didn't come down with a third tablet saying this is the only way you can write a biography. But if you look at that template, and if you look at the biographies which are in the program books of the guest artist's biography in symphony orchestra program books or in recital series, there's a style in which we use, and until you can write something a little bit better, use the one that that NYO posted for me. That's sort of an industry standard template. Photos, reviews, and articles. Sadly, we don't find as many reviewers going to concerts. A city like Toronto has no dedicated classical music critic anymore. There are entertainment editors, that do show up now and again, and there are subcontracted. There's a gentleman named John Terrells who was sort of the last positioned classical music critic. He has since left journalism, but he's often invited back to write an article or two. And therefore, in lieu of reviews, often newspapers and write articles about the upcoming show, because we don't have the time today to sort of explain, but newspapers' role is not to sell your show. You can buy advertising for that, but if the newspaper can sort of support that ecology of the entertainment industry, then the entertainment industry in turn buys advertising. It's a long, convoluted relationship, and therefore, as a result, more and more articles are printed in advance of a concert, in advance of the event. All of the above biography, photo review article is found in what our industry calls a one sheet, a promotional sheet, a flyer. These are all terminology, and further down I will have a few more examples. What else is in your electronic press kit or your hard copy press kit? A repertoire list. But again, to say that you have 14 Haydn string quartets and the Razumovsky 59s as a solo violinist, it means nothing to me as a concert organizer or someone who's interested. What is more interesting to me would be the program proposal. What is it that you would like me to present on your behalf? What is it that you are trying to sell to me? Because in essence, I appreciate that you may know the string quartets or the piano trios or the quintets, but I'm not putting together an ensemble for you. Perhaps that information is more interesting for a chamber music festival. If that situation comes in, that the artistic director of a chamber festival is looking to find musicians to put together. I'm not sure if anyone has heard this saying, but you sort of contour your resume for the job you apply for. Well, that holds true for our industry. If you are sending this to a concert presenter, if you're sending this to a new music presenter, if you're sending this to a chamber music festival, you sort of contour your information for the relevance of the recipient. So, audio and video demo, and I say the word contact information on everything. Of course, if something is on a flash stick, it's hard to put your information, but I have to stress to all of you, how many of you have this sort of your standard, let me see if I have, your Lexar, sorry, there we go, your sort of your Lexar thumbnail. I'm sure on my absolutely horrific office desk here, I probably have easily 8 to 10 flash sticks. So this one is actually a business one for my own information. But if you were to send this out to me, it would get mixed up with the rest of the ones in a little box that I have here. Handwrite your name on it. Even something as basic as that is important. And whether it's printed or electronic, it's just the delivery of it. So, moving along, business card, contact information. I'm just gonna, I know it sounds really fundamental and basic, and I'm glad to see that more and more schools are starting to offer students email addresses, and use whatever one is the most consistent and that you check. Your name, your instruments, your email address. Don't give me your U Toronto or your U Ottawa if you never check that. And if you happen to have you went to University of Toronto, then you did your master's at Calgary, and then you're going to McGill for your doctorate. So you have 3 different email addresses, but primarily you use your Gmail. Then use the auto forwarding from your universities to all go to your Gmail accounts. I joke about these I love my Strad type email addresses. You want an email address that's easy for people to remember. Figure that out. Your name is probably the easiest for me to remember, So your website, if you have one. And I know a lot of young musicians say how important is a website. My position on that is if you feel that your activities warrant a website, then make a website. If you're not at the point where if you're, let's turn it around and think about all of you surf websites, I'm sure. Why do you go back to a website on a daily basis or on a weekly basis? Because there's fresh content, there's new content. If your career is not at a point because you're in 3rd year undergrad or you're in 1st year masters, that's okay. The next week, I'm going to talk about the pillars of career success, and one of them is duration. I often use 2 dear friends. I know one and the other is dear friend. John Perry, the piano teacher guru. He turned 84 and he's still performing. Leon Fleischer, Menachem Pressler. These are people who are still out there performing, and they are well into their mid 80s, if not late 80s, if not 90. You have a long time of a career ahead of you. So I don't feel that if you're in your 1st year university that you have to have your websites. Unless you truly are performing and having fresh content that you can keep available on your website. Telephone numbers / cell phone numbers. Address, if comfortable, it's not needed. I know there are security issues with that type of information. So if you don't want to put your street address, don't bother. Yes, put your Facebook, your Twitter, your social media addresses. That's why you have them, and that's sort of why you post, your lunch from yesterday on Facebook, because you want people to notice you. So here you are developing your career, and you're shy about it. I've never understood the dichotomy, the paradox of that concept. So make sure people can follow you, find out who you are. And one of the interesting things that as a classical artist, classical music agency, and many of the conversations we're having because of COVID, one of the areas that we have, the classical musicians have fallen behind compared to most other genres, has exactly been classical musicians seldom develop their own fan base. And during this time when that infrastructure of finding you an audience, that administrative duty of an orchestra, of a concert series to find you audiences has been taken away, so many, the singer-songwriter, the indie band circuit, the folk musicians shoot a message out to their 10,000 followers on Facebook or their 8,000 followers on Twitter or on whatever platform, and tell them that, I'm doing a live streaming show this Saturday, and they find their own audience. So again, as you, the next generation, are coming up, keep these things in mind. Biography we talked about last week, so I'm going to quickly skip that. Try to keep it all on one page. That's always part of your publicity material. Photos. Try to make sure they look like you. It can go both ways. It can be such an old photo that you've matured drastically, or that you're so made up that you'll never look like that on stage. Keep these things in mind. And yeah, uh, often people say, should we show the instruments? It's a tough call. I always believe that the more images that you have available, the better it is. If we had more time, I'd even explain the competitive purpose of having multiple pictures. Nicely composed, it looks professional. Something recent on my roster. I try to encourage my artists to update their photos every 2 years. Some choose not to, some choose to. Um, Many of you have probably heard of the Griffin Trio. The Griffin Trio are well known because of obviously their artistic excellence, but they are always keeping their image fresh. There's always a new image of them, and that's just par for the course. Photo credits. Make sure none of you would ever want to play a concert where the concert organizer forgot your name. Give the photographer the credit. There is an artistic excellence in photography. Give that photo artist their credits. And if you can, name, instrument, contact information. How do you do that on a JPEG file? I will explain. Costs, again, if you have a professional photographer who's your best friend, zero is fantastic. If you don't, you get what you pay for. This is what I'm referring to. Save it, save the file name. Take that time to just change it once in your file, and every time it sends out, at least, sure, if you want a really long name, then Jane Smith _Violet, and in brackets the name of the photographer would be great. Try not to send out JPEGs with burnt in watermarks. Give the photographer that, or at least when you're sending it out in the body of your email, say photo credit goes to Joe Blue Photo Studio. So keep that in mind. Obviously, the higher resolution, the better. I'm not a tech instructor, so I don't quite understand it. But make sure you're not sending out low resolution pictures. Articles, back in the day when the Toronto Star would actually come out to a concert and review it. We would take the time. My office would send us off to a graphic designer, and they would set it up for us properly so that it looks professional. If there's anything I can stress as an agent, as a manager, all of these things reflect on you. There should be no stress in developing the non-performance aspect needed for your career. So if you can't get that in order, how can I trust that you're going to get your performance in order? And in a day and age where there are so many available artists all vying for the one or two concert opportunities, it does matter. Everything does matter. At the end of the day, when push comes to shove and you're both two emerging excellent string players vying for the Tchaikovsky D major violin concerto slots, and there's equal reason to hire both, it may very well come down to who's got the better material, because at the end of the day, the orchestra, the concert series, the chamber music festival needs to sell your show. Dan, yes, this will also be posted, made available, like the biography. Again, contact information. As I mentioned, the notion of reviewers are becoming more and more extinct. What can you use in lieu of a newspaper article? Well, See if you can get a letter of recommendation. Why is it that we used to use a newspaper review? Because it was a third party's account of your excellence. If you can get a letter of recommendation that is knowledgeable, and you'd be surprised how not knowledgeable a lot of people are. So the bigger name that you can get, the stronger, the more prolific person you can get, the better. Get a letter of recommendation, but ask the person who's writing it, can I use this as part of my promotional material, um, and have that in lieu of a Calgary Herald, the Vancouver Straits, Halifax Gleaner, etc., etc. So, bloggers editorial. I know in the singers world, there are a number of websites now that review concerts. I know that there's one in Toronto called the Toronto Concert Reviews.ca, a guy named David Richards who writes for that. Use things like that. Other things that you can use, of course, past printed programs. If you were invited by a professional concert series, at the end of the concert, ask the ushers, ask the volunteers, can you give me a stack of my programs? Keep those, because that shows that someone else trusted, thought highly enough of you to engage you in performance. And that's sort of a testimonial of a stamp of approval type of a mentality of showing them a program. Repertoire list, again, your name, instrument. You can do it by composer. I'll put these up there. But again, thank you. Sorry, I've got roles study. That's for obviously voice. You're approaching Music Toronto here in Toronto, who does 3 emerging young artist concerts every year. The artistic team doesn't really care that the Shostakovich Concerto or that the Brahms Concerto. They're more interested in what program would you propose in 2022-23 when we're considering. So a program proposal would be more ideal. Having said that, especially in this day and age right now, because of COVID and all the cancellation and postponements that will happen as a result of that, as a management agency, I'm faced with concert organizations saying we won't be ready for, I don't want to say this, but for summer of 2021, they won't be ready for next summer. So can we look at your artists for 2022? Well, I initially got them to book 2021 last fall. I'm not sure that that artist will be traveling with that program in 2022. So make sure that you have a date, underneath program proposal as of May 2020. Please confirm with artists prior to printing, because you may not have the you've been gearing up for the Beethoven 250. You may not have those sonatas in your hands in 2022. Sample programs, proposed programs. Sorry, these are old slides, but you sort of tell them what season this program is proposed for. Again, because it's my company, things go out on my letterhead. I have a contact information. Here as of September 2006 for activities for a program that would have happened in 2007-8. You guys get just add a few more years, a decade or so. Again, programs subject to change. Protect yourself. Have that waiver in your materials. Program subject to change. Please confirm with management or artists prior to printing the publication of this information. Audio supports. A lot of young artists ask me, what should I put on an audio cassette? I'm dating myself, an audio sampler of myself. Rule of thumb: the best artistic quality. If you have have 4 works available, and 3 of them are impressionist pieces, and the 4th one is a classical piece. But the classical piece is not that good. Do not use it. I'd rather not be made aware that your shortcomings for that, for whatever reason, it could have just been you were running out of time in the hall where you're recording, and then you didn't lay it down as well as you'd like. Whatever you send out, make sure it is the best artistic quality. This holds true. This could easily be audio/video. Sufficient music to represent your submission purpose. If your program proposal is a classical series, then don't send out a 20th century audio sampler. I know it sounds really fundamental, but I say these things because you cannot believe the number of times I have been on selection committees, on competition application committees, on grant funding selection committees, where people put in, they're proposing a tour of impressionists. The program that they're touring with is, French impressionist program, and nothing on the audio support has French repertoire on it. So, yes, make sure it represents you the best. Ensure that movements and tracks are individually done. Take the time. Do not just put down sonata or bagatelle. Take the time to do all of these, and date of recording, location. The number of times which, as a young artist, you guys are probably working with a lot of pianists. One of the 2 of Canada's top chamber pianists happen to be on my roster, Jamie Parker and Philip Chu. If I hear a recording and you don't put down the name of the pianist, or if you did put down the name of the pianist, and that was a Jamie Parker or a Phil Chu, I'd pick up, I'd WhatsApp them and say, hey, you recorded with so-and-so. You'd be amazed, again, as what Allison mentioned, as what Andrea mentioned, how small the networking is, how small the connections are. So include all of these, and if possible, your engineer's name, your name, instrument, and contact information. Stick it all on a USB stick and make sure there's, your name is here. I quickly mentioned this industry thing called the one sheets. Here's a little quote, picture, name of the ensemble, biography, contact information. Because again, sure, these 2 guys, many of whom you guys know, can play anything. That doesn't help me trying to promote and sell them. They had a program called the Vienna Effect. We have a tribute to Menuhin program, etc., etc. We have other type of one sheets that we use in this industry. I talked about the press folder. Some of this stuff is arts and craft day at home, but you try to make it look professional. You try to color theme your material, and that is key factors. There we go. Oops, sorry. It does cost money, and no industry in this world that expects someone to pay for their services doesn't invest into it. You want to buy, Nike spends the money to advertise and promote their shoe before they expect you to buy their shoe. That holds true whether it's a Toyota or it's a restaurant. What makes you think that a chef sits in his kitchen for 18 years and opens up a restaurant and expect people to come? There is a level of investment into your career, and it's more than just the practicing. It's more than just paying for the master class. It's more than just taking a summer with NYOC. There is a hard cost to developing your materials. Correlation between the money and the product. You expect someone to pay you for the performance. They expect that they will get professional photos, a well-written biography. A concert series is not there to write your biography. They expect that you are providing them with the proper material. And the press kit, again, it's your first impression. You spoke with somebody and you sent them a USB kit, a stick, or you sent them a zip file. It represents who you are. So all of these things. Thank you. Again, I ran a little long. I see a few questions. Emily and Andrea is still there. Hey, well, so you finally heard me teach it. So thank you for staying around. Leo asked, anything from the perspective of an administrator that you wish orchestral musicians did differently? Very good question. Leo has been here for every one of these talks and always very engaged with questions. Thank you, Leo. Hope we get to meet.
Yeah, thanks, Leo. That is a great question. And I mean, I think my first thought is that coming back to earlier when we were speaking about communication, to make sure that that's a priority in terms of making sure whether it's asking the right question, sharing a concern, but always in a respectful way, because also as Andrew was saying, sometimes the relationship between musicians and administration can be a bit fraught from time to time. But to take the perspective that you want to be solution oriented, to find something that's going to work for both the musicians and the administration, that would be an approach that would serve, frankly, anyone well, regardless of whether it's an orchestra setting or otherwise.
Absolutely, and sort of where I think I went astray with Jeff Alexander, who now runs the Chicago Symphony, was he, in his talk, he said that in his tenure at the Vancouver Symphony, he could count on one hand how many times the players knocked on his door to bring up suggestions, concerns, issues. And he was probably in Vancouver for at least 8 years. So I see that changing. I've got friends who are concertmaster of Toronto Symphony. I've got friends who are principals of many orchestras, and it's wonderful to hear that during this time, and definitely now during COVID, how the communications is happening, and more of the players are being aware and sensitive to the challenges of the administrative job. So hopefully that's Leo, if one day you do make it onto, you are employed and win the audition, be involved with administration, be the conduit between the players and the musician and the administration, because to a certain level, this train runs on two tracks, so to speak, but we're still going to the same destination. So hopefully this new emerging clan of artists, orchestral players, will see the administrative role differently and be a part of that. So thank you. Is it worth making your press kit generally available on your website, or is it more used for sending out specifically? Good question. Again, the printed hard copy press kits is becoming less and less in demand. Sadly, I have gone to I, as part of my responsibility as an agent, I attend many what we call trade shows. The same way that if you have an interest in cars, you may go to the auto show or the home show. Our industry has these things called contacts, and the U.S. also have these type of conferences on a much larger scale. And I remember one time I was gonna do a bit of city sightseeing and was coming home on a later flight. Ended up checking out a little bit later, and as I was walking out of the hotel, walked past the chamber service carts and took a quick glance and probably saw 30, 40 press kits in the garbage bin. The In today's society, we're not giving out the hard copy press kits. So yes, to have it available on your website is a much more environmentally sensitive way of doing it.
And if I can chime in here too as well, Andrew, I mean, from an administrator's side, booking a guest artist, it can be enormously helpful to be able to access the press photos and bio, particularly, and have those readily available in case, in case there's a deadline approaching, because it's the quickest way to share that kind of information if you were ever booked to be to replace an artist who perhaps had fallen ill or something like that. So you might be stepping in at the last minute to have those materials quickly available online. So an insert could be created for a concert program. So the website for the orchestra could be updated. All of that is really valuable from an administrator's point of view as well.
Leo, and to further Andrea's comments, exactly that. I probably, because my company's websites can download high resolution images, that aspect of I kind of miss it, the days when someone would actually pick up the phone and call, and it was another means of staying in touch. But as we know, most graphic designers, most administrators work on deadlines, and that deadline may very well be at 2 a.m. or, that's when they're finally, most of the graphic designers I work with are all nighthawks. And if they realize, oh, I need so-and-so's picture, and the only one available is the one on your website, that is, when you save it, a low-res version, then it's kind of useless. So having it available on your website is ideal. But I know that Columbia Artist Management back in the day required that someone asks for the password for downloading a picture. They didn't want to make it available, but again, at 2 a.m. in the morning, I don't really want to be called to give a downloadable password. So yes, it's two prongs. Someone still has to draw attention to your website. How do we get that available before they actually use the press material for reproduction? So there was a time when I was a kid and heard that in the new millennium we will be a paperless society. Unfortunately, I still print one sheet. I still have a company roster that's printed that I hand out to people. I have to develop a website, and a couple of years ago my website had to be mobile friendly. So as technology changes, we still have to keep the old with the new. So we have it all. So Dan had a question. Many orchestras members lists doesn't show a keyboard position. Is it common for orchestras to not have a full-time keyboard position? And if so, how do people get on their radar? Ooh. Good question, Dan. I know Toronto Symphony. Were you around when that Pat Kruger finally retired?
I'm not sure. That might have been just before I started there.
Okay.
If I remember correctly.
Dan, are you familiar with Orchestras Canada? If it's oc.ca, and They always have the posted available audition positions. You're right. Most orchestra in this day and age are all very budget sensitive, and the cost to maintain a full-time pianist is rather expensive. It's another position. And though I know when you read a job posting, it shows how much money the window, the range of salary, but the cost to an organization, there's a portion above that. So the end result is an expensive cost. And sadly, the role of the keyboard in symphonic work is very limited. And so it's a little bit easier for orchestras to just bring them in as extras. How do you get onto things like that? I will reach out to Allison and ask you, because she would directly be involved in that aspect. But often, I know Toronto Symphony posted a job which they did not hire. Pat Kruger, I remember doing myself doing the Toronto Symphony Women's competition when I was a kid. And Pat Kruger was my pianist, so she had been there for 40, 50 years, and they haven't quite replaced her. I'm not sure if they're going to an international search on that. How do you get onto things like that? Get to know Dan. Are you a pianist? I'm not sure, and we don't have a lot of information about those who are in the room. But get to know the principal players in your town. Play recitals with them. Get to know them. You mill around that society, that ecology of musicians in your town. It's about the networking. It's about the who do you know. As sad as it is, it's not what you know, it's who you know. There's no magic board where you just put your name and say, hire me, Dan Leung. I'm a pianist. But people, and then everything that Allison mentioned and everything I mentioned about Andrea, about her experience and her track record and her reputation, ended up with her being interim executive director for Regina Symphony. You showed up prepared. I think if Allison didn't quite say it, I'll paraphrase. You don't act like a jerk when you show up and play with your new colleagues, and people want to be with you. And when the opportunities come up to do a Debussy La Mer that requires the piano parts, am I right on that piece? I know the Rodrigo has a piano part that's you happen to be playing with the principal second violinist and the cellist, and all of a sudden they say, oh, we need a pianist, and those people will bring up your name now and again. So that's sort of how you have to get onto the radar for any gig. And the role of a manager my job is to keep the name of the Griffin Trio in front of those hiring on their minds 4 or 5 times a year, whether it's through a conference or whether it's a telephone call or through sending them my e-blast or whatever it may be. So it's just to keep your name out there and just don't be a wallflower. Don't if you go to a concert, get to know the concert organizer, get to know, Andrea started volunteering, and it's funny that Allison said that she volunteered at the Canadian Opera Company's Richard Bradshaw Amphitheater series, and you go to a concert. How do I know you're not an accountant or a bank manager? Oh, you're a musician. Well, figure out who else is in that industry. Get to know them. So hopefully that helps. Any other questions?
I think that's it. And I think Dan said, yes, he is a pianist, just so you know.
Okay, just making sure.
So I just wanted
to have to say, first learn to play the piano.
So I'll just thank you one more time. Thank you so much, Andrew, for this ongoing series of talks. And thank you, Andrea, so much for joining us from over out west. Oh, we have just one more quick question, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay.
Mateen, can I save your question? And I guess this is sort of the cliffhanger. To sort of next week's topic. It's sort of I call it my 3 pillars of the life of a career, the career of a musician, and part of that will quickly talk about that, and you know that I see the word financial stability. It's especially in this day and age of COVID. The most successful restaurant in Toronto doesn't have financial stability, which up until March 15th, they were, you know, I'm sure they were looking at their third color, what color Porsche they're going to get for their third car. It's a little bit more than a quick answer, and I fully respect that question. So can we save it for next week's talk? And I was pleased. Hopefully, all of you have now sort of seen where I have directed my so esteemed guests. I wanted to show you, you know, someone young and who was an NYO alumni with Cameron, and then Allison, and then Andrea. And next week, I just got confirmation that Jonathan Crow will be my guest. And obviously, you know, in his position, he can bring a lot of insight as well. So tell your friends that. But yes, I will. I'm going to actually cut and paste your question and save it.
Yep, we'll save Mateen's question for next week and post it in the chat again, and you can address it then.
Okay.
So we'll sign off now. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. Thank you to Andrew and Andrea.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Okay, bye everyone.